to the City Museum here in Port Hueneme. And our speaker today is Councilman Tom Pick. He'll speak on a redevelopment.
Let's see about that after the presentation. It's worthy. First, I want to acknowledge a few folks. We got Mayor Breeze back in the corner there. We got Councilman Sharkey and his wife, Beverly, from actually the Friends of the Library. That's her claim to fame.
And here.
And here. Oh, you're a member of the commission?
No.
No, okay.
I'm a volunteer.
You're a volunteer. Okay. And then we have Bernadette from the library itself. Thank you for coming. And there's my uncle over there. And I have to pay him to come. Yeah, Shelley Berger from the United Water Conservation District and other avenues that he's pursuing. And then we have Mike Morgan, Mayor of Camarillo.
Hey, Mike. Candidate supervisor.
Oh, we got Bob Allen back there running the video. Did I miss anybody? Listen, obviously with a crowd like this is supposed to be...
Yes, Jim?
Yeah.
No, absolutely.
Jim Hensley, council member, Port Hueneme.
No comment.
No comment. Okay. Obviously, with a crowd like this is intended to be a conversational piece, not a presentation. So I welcome you to interrupt me whenever you think it's appropriate. You want to ask a question. What I'm going to do is give you a little bit of hard facts, but I'm leading up to some fun stuff that you don't know about redevelopment that you're going to learn about. And things about this. Some things that maybe shouldn't be told, but I'm going to tell them anyway. So we're going to have fun at this stuff. I like to start out with this thing because this is probably the most dramatic before and after you're ever going to see. You have on the left the city's primary sewage treatment plant that up until the early 70s dumped raw sewage into the ocean. And it was replaced on that very site by what's now the Dorright Cultural Center, or the Pavilion, Ocean View Pavilion. So I always like to start with this because that's the most dramatic example of before and after. Now, you'll have to forgive me, I'm not very good at technology, so if I screw up, so be it. Okay, so who am I? Like I said, I like these befores and afters. The before is me in a blighted condition. The after is what's happened over the next 30, 40 years. Okay. Some people think I look better when I was blighted. I had more hair, I was thinner, and all that kind of stuff. But a little about me. I came right out of Cal Poly. I was an architecture and urban planning guy. And I had the good fortune and then ultimately the curse of finding Port Hueneme. Because unlike, I had the privilege of walking into a circumstance where college graduates normally don't have the opportunity to take their book-learned education and apply immediately upon their employment. And that's what happened. I walked into a situation where development was well on its way and was gaining momentum. And I had the good fortune of walking into that situation, and I had the time of my life for 22 years. It was fun. There is no such thing as a problem. It's a challenge, and I just love to overcome challenges. So what the curse of having been exposed to how it's supposed to work when people work together, when you collaborate with the evil developers, because that's not how it's done today, is wonderful things can happen. And ever since then, in the work that I've done, the cities I've been employed for, the consulting work that I've performed, I've never found anything close to what the city experienced during that time. So I'm always looking for that, it was a high plateau to reach, and I've not reached it since. So this city is special. All right, so just to give you a little bit of a sense of magnitude of what redevelopment has done to the city, the black line represents the 4.5 square miles of the area of the city proper. The area in blue is owned or controlled by the Harbor District and the Navy. So that leaves about half of the city is really outside of the jurisdiction that is within the realm of the city that they have authority over. So the area in yellow represents where all the redevelopment and revitalization activities have occurred over the last 50 years. That represents about a third of the city, but if you take out the harbor and the Navy, it represents 60%. So that gives you a sense of magnitude of the importance of redevelopment or the impact that it's had geographically on the city. So here's kind of the, setting the stage for why was redevelopment even entertained. This was a hellhole. And that's the only way I can characterize it. We go back to the early 60s, and there was a great influence by virtue of World War II, where we had troops coming in here and the Navy coming in here overnight. And housing went in. Pictures to the left is a bungalow that actually was moved from the Navy base into our redevelopment area. But that's the kind of housing that was put up overnight. And so we had an instant problem after World War II to deal with that legacy. And then, there's the harbor influence and, ships come and go and the maritime industry comes and go. And so we had some unsavory conditions in our downtown. So that just kind of sets the stage for, okay, we got a problem. Well, not only do we have a problem, but the magnitude of the problem, the predominance of blight, shows up in these little exhibits to the left. One is the results of visual surveys made of the exterior conditions of property, and the other one to the right has to do with the structural conditions based on inspections that the city had made. And the dark areas represent extremely bad situations. So you can see the extent of blight that existed. So it isn't just the fact that we had a problem, it was the preponderance of the blight, the magnitude of the problem we had to address. Now these are some of the other challenges outside of the physical, visual blight aspects of redevelopment. We're at the end of the road, okay? And I've had these discussions with folks in the past about, geez, how could you have allowed some of those early condo projects to occur on the beach? Well, guess what? We were a red line community. Anybody know what that means? Prior to the advent of housing reform legislation, the Community Reinvestment Act, it was a lawful practice for lenders to say, we're not putting money into that area because it's a bad place, okay? And because our demographics were so poor, and because our conditions were so blighted, and the fact that we had very meager ability for the public to spend money on commercial endeavors, retail, we were behind the eight ball. And we had to rely on private developers that were self-funded to help rebuild our city. Even though we would have liked to maybe seen, in today's terms, something different on the beach, we had to deal with the circumstances at the time. So I bear that in mind, that today is a whole different environment than it was 40 years, 50 years ago. Here's an example. God, this was a really difficult decision the council had to make. Our buying power, our purchasing power is so meager, and the fact that we are at the end of the road, that circle I showed that was on that previous slide, that's typically how realtors, big box outlets, retails, businesses look at their purchasing area. It's in concentric circles. Well, half our circle's in the Pacific Ocean, okay? And the other half is made up of predominantly low and moderate income, okay? So we have we did then, and it's still a trouble, a very marginal base to build a retail commercial kind of environment, okay? So here was one of the first choices the council had to make, and it wasn't easy. This is the Beachport Shopping Center just down the street. We were negotiating with Vons at the time as being an anchor, because that's usually what makes a neighborhood shopping center work, is you've got to have a draw. And usually that's a supermarket. Vons was willing to locate, it wouldn't be a super Vons, it would be in the range of about 30,000 square feet. It's not big, but nonetheless it's a name recognized commodity. At the same time, we were looking at Port City Plaza. That's the shopping center here at Pleasant Valley and Ventura Road. And it was falling into disrepair. You can see that on the left. And we were left with this difficult choice, the council was left with a difficult choice. Either we turn our back on Port City Plaza and not do anything and just let it fall down, and then invite Vons into our new shopping center, or Vons said, if you put money into Port City Plaza, we're walking. Well, council decided we got to take care of our own first, and that's Port City Plaza. So that's why today you don't have a grocery store at Beachport Shopping Center, even though that was the original game plan. That's what I'm trying to say is we have such a tough market to accommodate and overcome, and this was a live example of that. So, you talk about the bad, but
Yeah, I just a question. Like, what was the decision to do? Both of them are Port Hueneme community, like the shopping center here and the shopping center here. Why was the decision to, tell Vons you can't come over here? Or why? What? They were both Port Hueneme. What was the decision choosing one versus the other?
well, part of it had to do, and it's Mary's Market now that's vacant, right?
Right.
Okay, it was Tradewinds Shopping Center, or Tradewinds Market, now it's vacant. It's about 20,000 square feet. That is less than what Vons or any other major grocer will be looking for. And I said that in the case of Beachport, 30,000 they could do, but they normally like closer to 40, 45,000, okay? So we couldn't steer them over to Beachport Shopping Center, or excuse me, to Port City Plaza, because it was only 20,000 square feet. That's far less than their minimum requirement. So as much as we would have liked to have married them up, it wasn't in the cards.
When did Mary's Market come in?
What's that?
When did Tradewinds come in?
Well, Tradewinds was part of that rehab project. That was all part of the negotiations to bring them into that that space. And you know, of course, today the conditions are a little different than it was back then. They did a magnificent job. It was a great neighborhood. I wouldn't call it a regional or community grocery store, but it certainly served the neighborhood in the area. And they did a great job. But then it's changed hands a couple of times since then. And that was the concern the council has. That, God, if we throw money into that marginal shopping center, is that throwing good money after bad? Versus going after a Vons, who's a name brand, and really building up downtown. It was a tough choice. So,
What's on the table today for DX Tradewinds?
Nothing.
Any new ideas?
no, I mean,
or-
you know, I'm hoping that the council will entertain some ideas on using the sales tax and its business licensing to maybe incentivize backfilling some of these vacant spaces, give them a subsidy in the early years of their tenancy, target these kinds of properties that are key properties to entice occupancy. But at this point, there's nothing on the books. So, okay, we talked about the liabilities, but these were our assets. You know, the harbor was in its infancy and really wasn't generating a lot of commerce. Hueneme Beach was not a very attractive place to go. And we have ocean frontage. And, you know, properties of similar location from the beach down in Santa Monica were commanding 3-4 times value that what we saw in Hueneme. So we have these assets that we really haven't capitalized.
Tom, before you change,
Oh,
I saw a plat with some, that indicated some lots, property lots were down on the beach area.
over on the east end of the beach?
Yeah,
Yeah, that was what we called an antiquated subdivision. We acquired most of those. Some were abandoned altogether because they were below the mean high tide line. They were in the water.
right.
Okay. And so, yeah, we did, and Oxnard did the same thing on Ormond Beach. They had to acquire some of the antiquated lots that were over there as well. So they're all extinguished, the lots don't exist any longer. That was like a Florida Everglades, you know, would you like to buy a lot? Ocean frontage for $50? Sure, okay, except you can't do anything with it. All right, so here's another advantage. We were, if not the first, one of the first redevelopment agencies in Ventura County. And we were able to take advantage of, okay, it's a liability, now you're going to turn that lemon into lemonade. In that the federal government had its own version of California redevelopment. They called it urban renewal. And you got a lot of money if your demographics were as dismal as we were, okay? And that's what led to the rebuilding of the harbor and the expansion. But beyond that is that once urban renewal was terminated in the early 70s, we continued to get a high level of subsidy through the city's community development block grant program. It was the morphing of redevelopment to block grants. And because we had been involved, invested in the urban renewal program through the federal government for 8-10 years, we continue to receive a lot of money to continue that process. So we had the good fortune of starting early, getting into the game at the beginning rather than at the end, and then allow us to continue that effort years down the road. Then we talk about California. Tax increment financing is what fuels redevelopment. And it's a simple concept, is that as the values of property increase because you're making improvements in these neighborhoods, you get a percentage of that stepped up value and tax that goes right back to the redevelopment agency. Because we were a poor community and our tax basis was so low, it wouldn't take much to start stepping up that tax basis and generate revenue. And that's what allowed us to fuel a lot of the projects that followed. So again, we were just fortunate that we got in early in the process. That little slide on the right just shows you that when you pay your property taxes, it doesn't mean it all goes to the city of Hueneme. We get about 18 to 19% of the tax bill that we pay. The rest goes to a bunch of other taxing entities, school districts, flood control, what have you. And so again, we get 18, 19% of the cut of the apple, and if our apple is at the bottom of the barrel and that apple starts to grow, that's a lot of money. Okay. So it allowed us to fuel redevelopment in the years to come. Another advantage by getting in early, I got to tell you, there's no way we could repeat some of the projects we've done today. Back in the 60s, we didn't have the Coastal Commission. We didn't have CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. We didn't have the Uniform Relocation Act that requires you to pay $1 zillion for the privilege of relocating somebody. So we, again, by interceding early in the process, we were able to accomplish some things that there's absolutely no way we could do today. Okay? I don't want to bore you with all that, but the history is that there were certain periods of time when the feds and the state ratchet up their regulations to the point where in the 90s and beyond, we couldn't do what we've done. So a lot of times people think of redevelopment as just slash and burn. You go out there, you buy property, you tear it down, and you rebuild it. That's not redevelopment. It's part of the process. There are really, in the case of Port Hueneme, there were 4 major aspects of the redevelopment process. One is traditional redevelopment, that is land acquisition. You go in and acquire land, you find a developer to partner with to reuse the property, you clear it, and you relocate the businesses and the individuals. But there's revitalization. This is code enforcement, property maintenance, housing rehabilitation. And a lot of people don't realize that those programs were funded in large part by the tax increment from the redevelopment effort. So revitalization is part of redevelopment, but it's not as intrusive as what people think of redevelopment. Urban renewal, tearing things down. This is actually building things up. And then there were a couple other areas that the city focused on. Public improvements, to modernize our facilities. Building things like the Herbert Templeman Educational Center, or the library, or the Orvides Carpenter Center. It was important that we had a public presence, and so we spent a lot of effort and money in enriching the community, rebuilding its infrastructure. And then finally, urban design, which I really still to this day, I think kind of differentiates the city from its neighbors. Putting money into signage, civic signage, to give a certain sense of identity. Landscaping, median islands, street furniture, all part of the branding process. So when you think of redevelopment, it isn't just knocking things down and rebuilding them. It's these other components as well that all feed into the changing the image of the community. All right, so what's the strategy? Again, we get back to that map. The areas in yellow, gold, and red represent where the focus of redevelopment and revitalization has occurred. The area in yellow are neighborhoods primarily north of Pleasant Valley Road. They don't need intrusive redevelopment, but they need help. And that's where you come in providing rebates and loans and home buyer mortgages to regenerate activity in those neighborhoods. The area in gold is kind of in between, I call transitional. Areas that need a little bit more attention, but maybe not to the extent of Surfside 4, which was a whole-scale clearance project. And then the area in red, Surfside 4 as an example, is where, in fact, it was determined it can't be regenerated on its own. There are too many problems. It needs to be acquired, cleared, and redone entirely. So that was our strategy. It was a threefold strategy, sure.
What was there?
What was where?
In Surfside 4, you
Oh,
said.
you'll see some of the pictures. It was a slum. That was the first thing I had to do when I came here. I had to go out and survey those buildings. It was scary. You'll see. All right, so now here's the history of the actual projects. The first project was the harbor project. That was to expand the harbor. The picture to the left shows it was about 8 blocks just to the east and north of where we are right now. And you'll see the circle there that gives you an orientation. That was a full-fledged urban renewal. All those properties you see outlined in white were acquired and cleared and made available for the harbor to expand its channel. So you can see kind of the before and after of the expansion that did occur. 37 acres, 120 properties were acquired, 200 businesses and residents were relocated. Like I said, you couldn't do that today. There's just no way that could be accomplished. We doubled the land area of the harbor and doubled its throughput capacity. This is where, and I don't want to get too far afield, is why the city and the district have had kind of a love-hate relationship over the years, is that this city really vested its soul into the expansion of the harbor, and now it's time to, pay back. Okay?
I noticed there's a little strip kind of like on the, border of the port and the beach. It looks like, but it's Oxnard's technically, but...
Is there
Well, there's Wainimi Beach, and then there's the port, and then there's this other little strip that is it looks like it's gerrymandered or something, like the little strip.
Silver Strand.
I don't know.
Did you see it on one of the slides? I'll be glad to go back.
Yeah, they probably know. I was just curious the history, how that little strip all of a sudden became Oxnard versus...
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it didn't look like it should be Oxnard's,
What the
but...
border of the basin.
Okay, so are you saying to the east of the harbor entrance? Is that what you're talking about? The La Janelle and the Silver Strand? And
Yeah.
Talk about.
I don't know if anyone knows, but it just seems like it was
Well, what little
gerrymandered.
history I have, I wasn't involved in the annexation process, but there was a thing called shoestring annexations that were done. Again, it was kind of like redlining. It was a legal process to cut people off from annexation.
Right.
Go ahead.
This has been a typical move of your neighbor everywhere.
The big O.
They even tried, before we did curb, they tried to go around and get the backside of Camarillo. Now they're trying to sell us their sanitary stuff back because they can't afford to ship it back to Oxnard. That's what they were doing to Wainimi, shutting you off.
Yeah. And shoestring, I'm not as familiar with the Silver Strand, Hollywood Sea. Over here, over at Ormond Beach, I am familiar with that. And they did shoestrings. It would actually extend their boundaries all the way to the ocean.
Yep.
And would stop the ability of the city of Wainimi to grow beyond that.
Exactly. You got it.
Port Wainimi installed sewer pump stations and sewer lines over into the Channel Islands Beach community area and owned and operated them up until late 90s. when Channel Islands Beach sued the city to take ownership of them. But apparently, that was part of the shoestring
Yep.
where the city wanted to annex that, so they installed.
Well, I'm gonna probably ruffle my uncle's feathers here. Don't want to get too far afield. There was a time when the Local Agency Formation Commission, about 25 years ago, asked the city of Hueneme to annex Silver Strand in Hollywood by the Sea, because they're unincorporated islands that are less, I think it was 100 acres was the threshold. And LAFCO was encouraging these kinds of annexation islands to go to adjacent jurisdictions because it's too costly to provide services. You got the sheriff having them all the way down Victoria, blah, blah, blah. So we took that task on, and we had a full house of folks from Hollywood by the Sea and Silver Strand that were just angry as hell, and they were going to lynch everybody because Hueneme is trying to muscle their way into taking their properties over. Well, little did they know that our analysis showed it was a loser. We don't want you. And it was one of those, people came there to lynch, and they walked out going, wow, what happened? So I guess I'm digressing here, but there was a point in time when we were asked to actually take those properties into the city proper, and we found that the cost would have been astronomical because of the infrastructure issues, the property maintenance, code enforcement, illegal construction, on and on and on. It just didn't make sense to the city.
Well, I
Would you like
think
to say something?
Yeah, I think.
No, raise your hand first, please.
I think what's interesting now is that the city of Oxnard is now forming a task force because they're quite upset that they have no say over the unincorporated areas of Silver Strand and Hollywood Beach, and it's all county right now. And it's in the city of Oxnard. They are now trying to do exactly what they tried to do to you. That's now trying to do that to County Ventura, because they have no say at the marina, what can be built, what can be done in the marina, nothing at all whatsoever. They can't even talk about traffic mitigation or impact based on any kind of development that's going on over there. They have no leases that they have control over in the marina. And so Flynn's trying to form this task force in order to have the city have more say and control over the harbor. So it's done a complete 180.
The legacy of the harbor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll go on.
Forever.
It will predate our death. Okay, so that's the harbor project. Then the next project was the area south of Hueneme Road
Tom,
between...
one question,
Oh, I'm
please.
sorry.
Did the city pay for all of that redevelopment work to expand the harbor? Did that-
Remember, a lot of it came from urban renewal money, federal money. Yeah, the city had some matching monies, but it was largely federal money. But this is the argument that I'd like to remind our friends across the street is, but we took all that property off of the private tax rolls.
Right.
Okay? So, regardless of where the money came from to assemble those properties, we've now taken 8 blocks of property off of the tax rolls. So that's the kind of discussion we've had in the past with the Harbor District. Is it, we invested in you, now it's time for you to invest with us. All right, so the next project is between Ventura Road and the Sunkist site. And then from Hueneme Road south to the beach. This is, the Anacapa Homes area. And so what you got here, a large part of the Anacapa project, the condos and the townhomes were the result of dredge spoil that came from the harbor in the first redevelopment project. In other words, if you look out there, you'll see that those properties are elevated. That's because the spoil material that came from the expansion of the harbor in the first redevelopment project went to elevate those properties because they were in harm's way. Not just, like the erosion events that we've been seeing here of late, but, we were just constantly inundated because we were kind of in a hole. And so we used that spoil material to build up those areas. Again, it was an ambitious project, 50 acres. We had 36 properties and 76 businesses and residences were relocated to make way for those projects. The biggest project, and this is when I kind of, arrived, was the community redevelopment project. It was the largest of all the 3 projects, and probably the most noteworthy part of that redevelopment. Surfside Village, Surfside 4, the hotel here across the street, which at one time was, what was it? It was
Country Inn.
No?
Country Inn.
What was that?
The Country Inn.
It was Bud Smith, Country Inn. You're right, it was the Country Inn. Anyway, and the Beachport Shopping Center. Well, and Miranda Park and Bubbling Springs, all of that in that area. It was a huge project.
What's that little fish hook at the top right?
Fish Hook.
Or-
We're talking about up here?
Yeah,
Right here?
yeah.
Okay, we're going to get to that. That was a fun project. That was the widening of Pleasant Valley Road and the Navy housing that fronted on Pleasant Valley Road. And there's a funny story, but I don't want to take away from the next slide. Yes, that was part of a expansion of Pleasant Valley Road and cleaning up that entryway to the city. So here's some of the befores and afters. John, you asked about Beverly, what was it like before Surfside 4? Well, there you go. It was a mess. And again, this was the most ambitious of all of the projects the city undertook. I don't even have the count of the number of properties that were acquired and the people that relocated. No way we could have accomplished that today. Just the regulations would not allow for it. So then we come to the Base Alignment and Closure Act, which is kind of a unique beast. It was the first Navy disposal in California. It's kind of interesting for those that may be familiar with the NCEL. Again, this whole, why did we accomplish so much? There were just such an alignment of stars. When this base closure came to be, Rear Admiral Nash, who was, I think, the best leader that this Navy base has seen, was our friend. And he was back in the Pentagon at the time that this base closure came up. And we were struggling with the Department of Defense and the Coast Guard and blah, 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 blah. And he came to our aid and was able to orchestrate a transfer of this property to the city, and then the city in turn transferred the majority of the property to the Harbor District. But part of that process, and this was the leverage, and I have a slide on this as well, is that we wanted sand. Because you're asking us, and you look at this slide, there's no sand in front of that NCL property. Well, that wall, at the time that the Navy was trying to get rid of it, was decrepit. The seawall was crumbling. And so we said, wait a minute, we're not going to take on your liability. We want to make certain that if we're going to assume ownership of this kind of property, that you're going to give us sand in return. And that led to legislation back in the mid-90s that guaranteed the federal government would take full responsibility of sand replenishment. Now, we couldn't get them to guarantee in perpetuity that you give you the money, but they accepted and acknowledged their responsibility, because the problems with sand, see, there's a submarine canyon down here. And when the sand comes across like this, plus you have a jetty, it all goes down into that canyon and goes out to the ocean. That's why we can't get natural sand to replenish our beaches. Well, as part of the exchange, if you want us to take on the liability of a disposal of Navy property, we want you to guarantee the sand. Okay, so that was a huge accomplishment. And the conferences that I went to later, where other communities were struggling with base closure and reuse, had these horror stories of fighting the government and fighting, whatever it was, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, whatever. We had, again, we were dumb lucky, and we had a great partnership. And it came from Admiral Nash, Rear Admiral Nash. If it wasn't for him, I don't know where we'd be today. Okay, so then this is just, so what did we do with the acquisition? Well, you can see the results. The harbor was able to take advantage of it. The city retained until recently a portion of it for aquaculture purposes, but more importantly, was creating this beach promenade. That was all part of the game plan in acquiring that property. Now, this is not a redevelopment area. This is what we call a strategy area. This is where it's a less intrusive process of revitalizing areas. You know, this wasn't all about buying, clearing, and rebuilding. And these are some of the projects. The trade goods market was an example. We used funds from the redevelopment agency and from the federal urban renewal program to assist the owners in rehabbing their property. And then to this day, we use a lot of that same money to help rehabilitate residential homes. Code enforcement came to be during that period of time. We were one of the first cities that had property maintenance enforcement. We also did what I call, well, some people would say search and seizure, systematic building code enforcement, where we actually went out and knocked on doors and said, hi, I'm here to help you. And oh, by the way, did you know that your roof is falling down? And fortunately, we got 90% cooperation. Yeah, occasionally we had to go to court to get an inspection warrant to get into the property to fix it. But that's short of having to tear it down. Okay? So it's a different approach to revitalizing. It's less intrusive, but it was aggressive. I will kid you. But we used a stick and a carrot approach. Okay, on the one hand, you know, we're going to enforce what we lawfully, you know, have the authority to do so, but we're not going to leave you out in the cold. And if you can't afford it, then we're going to make loans and grants available to you to fix it. So it was a combination of the two.
On the corner of...
By the way, you're out of your allotted number of questions.
This will be the last one, but on the corner of Wainimi and Ventura Road, there's a little shopping center. And before those, and then there's apartments, and then those townhomes went up. I remember there was 2 homes that the city burnt to the ground as an exercise for the fire department. Were they owned by the city, or did you have to go
Yes.
in and those were city properties?
So you're getting ahead of me. I like it. You know, you're thinking. Because I'll get to that slide. I'll answer that. All right. So what's the outcome of all this? Well, the slide to the chart to the left shows you what the conditions were when we started this endeavor in this largest redevelopment area. Pretty blighted. That's all that dark stuff. But then, less than 20 years later, this is the result. A subsequent survey showed that there was significant progress made. And the importance of this is, this wasn't an intrusive redevelopment process. It was, let's fix it now. Preventative action now, so that we don't have to go in there later and tear things down. So that's the beauty of the strategy that was worked out. Okay, so the overall outcome, we've built a sustainable future. We have a relationship with the harbor. We were largely part of their success and their expansion, and now we're benefiting from it. Our image, I still like to think, although Doug Breeze and others on the council have done a lot to make certain that when you enter and leave Port Hueneme, you know it. Okay? And in the case of the current council, they've put a lot of money into the streets when everybody else is complaining about the potholes in Oxnard. All of that adds up to the image, you know, and what differentiates us from the community. Okay, so again, I said this before, Surfside Village could not be repeated today. We had so many things going for us. Doral Wright, twice the president of the League of California Cities. He was the chairman of the Regional Coastal Commission and the State Coastal Commission during the time that we were putting that project together. We didn't have that kind of political pull. There's no way we could have accomplished what we did. And through the leadership of the council, we were able to get special legislation, Coastal Act legislation, that says that you only have to replace a house if you tear it down if it's not otherwise a public nuisance. Well, all of those homes were a public nuisance. That was a huge savings. We wouldn't have to rebuild, 300 units. because they were already declared to be a public nuisance. But it wouldn't have happened if we didn't have the political leadership that was well respected at the state level and had that kind of influence. And that's kind of what I'm saying here, is that you had stellar leaders that just stood tall in the saddle. They were risk takers, but they weren't reckless. They really believed in public-private partnerships. And of course, we know about the Harbor District, the Templeman Educational Center. We worked with the Navy on rebuilding all of the perimeter fencing and landscaping and widening Ventura Road, the Library District and the new facility there. And then the Veterans of Foreign Wars, which, again, I don't know how familiar you are with that, but that was a property that was adjacent to where Beachport cottages are today. And it was new for 52 kind of construction. And we worked with them along with the owners on across the street to rebuild their facility and take out a salvage yard in the process. So we used the partners that we had to really kind of to take advantage of their resources and to reaffirm their stake in the community. Another part of what made this all work is that there was a hell of a lot of investment into the planning process. Visioning. What do we want to accomplish? Let's assess what our true market potential is so that we maximize that opportunity. And let's bring in architects and experts to help us create that vision and continuity of vision. The library, same architect at the library did the Herbert Templeman Educational Center and also was a collaborator in the Doral Wright Cultural Centers. So we wanted to make sure that there was continuity of design, that the image would be replicated in each one of these projects. So planning played a huge role in making certain that we did it the right way. Now, these are just some of the examples of the stakeholders that were involved in that process. That the VFW, again, I don't know how long some of you have been in this community, but that facility that's there today was nothing like the one that was replaced, I can assure you. And then, okay, we already talked about the leveraging of assets and the ability to take advantage of our political partners. And in this case, with the NCL, they needed to get rid of the property and we needed sand. And that's how you go about the process of redevelopment. It's not my way or no way. It's how do we kind of bring our two agendas together and take advantage of each other's assets. Okay, I think we've already talked about this. And it wasn't just redevelopment. At the same time this is going on, and I'll step back 20 years, is that, okay, we were a tough town. And so it's one thing to change the visual impression people have of the town, but we also invested in our police department because they were huge. Al Gelati, he was a figurehead in this town. He made a huge difference in cleaning this place up. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Wasn't there a time when you were going to change the name to Channel Islands? I used to hear...
Well, I think that was Oxnard.
They were going to try to change it to Cabrillo.
Oh, I never heard that.
Wainimi.
Yeah, Oxnard was going to try to take it over, and they were going to call it Cabrillo.
Take over Wainimi?
Yeah.
That's news to me. Wow.
Long time ago.
Because the name for Wainimi still has a stigma to it.
Well, yeah, and it's one of those things, issues that kind of percolates to the surface now and then about rebranding the name of the city, you know. But there's a lot of people that still have, even though it's, you know, uncomfortable maybe to say Port of Wainimi versus Port Wainimi, you know, and what's the differentiation? But well, that's a whole different discussion. We'll leave it to Larry to schedule that another day. So what I wanted to say here is that it wasn't just redevelopment. We had rebuilding our police department, and we're not going to be a renegade community and people will be afraid to come here. Okay. We also wanted to retool our regulations so that we could use zoning, use our police power authorities to facilitate, not frustrate, development, okay? And a really good example was this project here at, what is that, Clara? Yeah, that's Clara and Ventura Road. It's Crystal Shores. It was just an accumulation of a bunch of old homes, and we didn't have the money to acquire it all because the cost would have been extraordinary. But we worked with the developer to provide additional authority to build units above the base density the zoning would allow. Okay? So we used our regulatory authority, in this case, to accomplish the same thing redevelopment would otherwise do. Okay? So it was all these things working hand in glove to make this a better place. It wasn't just one thing. And then organizationally, we had to kind of rebuild the team within City Hall so that they all have a vested interest and they're committed to a common set of goals. That means changing our attitudes about customer service. When I first came here, it wasn't quite that way. And then police protection, which I already mentioned. So this when I say redevelopment, it encompasses so much more than just simply slash and burn. So where are we today? Well, unfortunately, and we started this presentation, this was a 50-year report card. And the reason for that is that we started in '62, the governor terminated redevelopment just a couple of years ago. That means today, 2012, you don't see it on there, is that we no longer have redevelopment authority, okay, unfortunately. And it's had a tremendous effect on our financial capacity to continue on, not just redeveloping properties, but providing rehabilitation loans to people, rebates to fix their paint their house on the outside, mow their lawns, what have you. We don't have that same financial capacity that we once had. Now, it's not all bad. I mean, we still have some assets that the agency has acquired, and that we are going to try to do our best, the council will do what they can, to maximize what assets that we have remaining. But there's no question the kind of things that we've done over the last 50 years will not be repeated. Now, these are some of the things I call unfinished business, and we're right at ground zero. This is the museum. One of the things that we've long had hoped to do was to really create, using the museum as a centerpiece, as kind of a town hall, town center feature. And you have to step back, I didn't bring an aerial, but way back in the beginning when we started the Surfside 4 project, we were trying to create a pedestrian-oriented environment where people could walk up Bubbling Springs Channel, they could walk through Surfside 4, cross the street, and if you look at Beachport Shopping Center, you'll see that there's special paving that occurs here. The idea was, okay, that's all part of this interconnecting pedestrian process, and it would then continue over to the museum and then back down to Surfside Drive and Hueneme Beach. So this is still doable. All it takes is money. But that's one of the things that's still kind of on the books that wasn't accomplished. And the red arrows just simply show you that there was this interconnection of pedestrian access from down to Surfside 4 all the way around again to downtown and then back to the beach. We also have a couple of key pieces. I'm not sure what the future is for these, but the city does own a big chunk of land just to the beach side of where the cars are parked now at Sunkiss site. I don't know what the future is for that. The Guion easement is in front of the Anacapa single-family homes. Guion easement is simply to indicate that that's public trust lands, that we can use it for public purposes, but we can't use it for commercial purposes. We can't develop it, but certainly it could be a parking lot. Okay.
Can you go back one?
Oh, sure.
Real quick. See the yellow, the visitors?
Right.
Yeah. It's got some potential, but if there was a way to, your lighthouse, now, I've been here many years, and the only place I haven't been is the lighthouse, see what it looks like. And I've seen pictures of the house here. Is that the lighthouse?
I haven't seen that.
That's the old lighthouse.
Yeah, that was the original, not, that's gone,
I have a picture of it if you want.
unfortunately.
The reason I say that, it's such a great thing to be able to walk out to that lighthouse.
Well, it's still a
Is it a
neat
coffee
place,
shop?
it's not quite as dramatic.
But I mean to try to bring people here and tourist
yeah.
thing with, because I talk to some of your walkers in the morning, sometimes sit down and see, what do they think about this idea? Like a small, not center, but a place that has a little coffee shop and restaurant and maybe a boutique hotel, like 50 units, nothing big. And then be able to walk out to the lighthouse and do all those kinds of things. And I see you get a lot of good reception from people. I just want to find out where that would just enhance the area and make people want to come here.
Well, I think we all share that vision.
Okay.
But I will tell you that when I started, there seemed to be more of a community mindset. And today, I suspect that anything that's built in front of any of those homes, you'd find opposition.
Well, I don't mean anything tall. Nothing tall. The cars would be
Nothing tall.
behind it.
Okay.
Huh?
Nothing tall.
When I said boutique hotel, that's what I meant. I didn't mean 31-story tower.
No, I understand. I understand.
Just as a segue, we're going to be having a speaker talking about the old lighthouse and the new lighthouse on April 2nd. She's, in fact, what is the name for someone who takes care of the lighthouse? She's
Curator.
well, but it's not, she's not a keeper, she doesn't live there, but she does the tours
Right.
on there. So, yeah, that's going to happen. And she's written a book on all the greater Los Angeles area lighthouses. So I think she's also going to talk about the Anacapa one, too.
Do you know if the original lens is gone now?
It's there.
It's on the bottom floor, right?
Is it still there?
Yes, it's still
Yeah.
for now. That's good because
No, but that was part of the original planning. You know, we go back 30 years ago. That was the concept, was to interconnect the point entrance to the harbor to the rest of Wainimi Beach, that beach master plan that you saw. So, I mean, we realized 80% of that overall plan is still not complete. I mean, that's a work in progress. And here's some of the things that still need attention. Our gateways, I call them gateways, Pleasant Valley, Wainimi Road, that need assistance, need help. Unfortunately, we just didn't have the time and money yet to get to those. Now, the Surfside Motel, that's the lower left-hand corner, it's under construction, been under construction.
for 6 years.
Whatever. But, you know, these are the missing pieces that we had hoped to accomplish and it just didn't come together. Can it come together? I suppose it all really comes down to money.
Tom, that one slide you had that there was a question on with that little piece out on Pleasant Valley Road,
Oh, yeah,
did the city boundaries go out there?
yeah.
That's where it goes.
The little hook thing?
Here's some ideas that it's not unfinished business. It's ideas that just never came to be. There was a concept of doing a recreational vehicle resort at the far east end of Wainimi Beach, adjacent to the J Street Canal. There was also a marina Wainimi that was considered before the RV resort to build a marina right at where the city's pier is today in front of it. Now, again, those were ambitious ideas that just didn't come together. And here's a couple more.
Dubai?
Remember the one to the left?
It's like Dubai.
I don't even, you may not know about the one here just across the street. We were working with Martin Smith and Aaron Rasnick, two big names in the real estate industry in Ventura County, and looking at doing a 5-story stepped-up office complex and have as a major tenant the World Trade Center. And that was good, so we were working hand in glove as part of this. It was a relationship that wasn't necessarily made in heaven, so it didn't go there. And then the one that was really novel was the Sunkist site, item C there. That's that property over here where all the cars are parked. We were working with a developer that wanted to create a complex, a timeshare resort complex that was actually physically modeled after an ocean liner. It was pretty novel. But the market fell apart, and the next thing, the property now is in the hands of the public.
Tom, I was just wondering, when they finally reduce the Surfside that they're been taking a number of years, is that going to be, what kind of housing is that? Is that going to be regular housing, Section 8 housing? What will
When you
that
say
be?
Surfside,
That, I don't know, the hotels that they're,
Oh, it's Surfside Motel.
Surfside, the one they're remodeling for 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years.
it's a combination of apartments and short visitor stay. As I recall, and maybe one of the council can, because I can't participate in that discussion because I live right next door to it. But my understanding is that there would be short stay, transient occupancy in the front, and then apartments on the back, because it's an L-shaped property. Is that, anyone know any different?
That's my understanding, yeah.
Yeah, it's still not done.
It's gone through a couple iterations, and, there was some single, talking about single room occupancy, maybe not, maybe it's gonna be condos in the back. It's supposed to be condos in the back, condos or apartments in the back, and it's still a motel in the front.
Right, that was my...
That's the last thing I heard.
Well, that's what I understood too. Somebody else?
I've been told by some of the condo associations, it's kind of like a halfway house for people coming out on parole, probation.
Well, we just had an arrest here a couple of days ago. Yeah, and now he's in hospital. So anyway, those are some of the ideas that were once entertained and haven't come to fruition. One of the things that I was really hoping could come together was a joint redevelopment with Oxnard. And anybody know who Steve Kenny is? Steve Kenny is a resident here. He was the redevelopment director when I was here for Oxnard. And we got together and we knew that there were some common issues, not just Ormond Beach connecting to Hueneme Beach, but the fact that the demographics of their neighborhoods adjacent to J Street were very much like our own. And we can't ignore the fact that, okay, we got this artificial line that separates the two cities. We're in it together. And we were hoping to put together a JPA, a Joint Powers Authority redevelopment project. It just didn't come together.
But Tom, the difference is very obvious. I mean, you know when you're in Hueneme, and then you certainly know when you cross over to Oxnard, particularly on Hueneme Road. And if you're unsure, you look to the left, and then you see, oh, okay, yeah, this is Oxnard.
You don't want me to say that.
Well, it is what it is, but clearly there was no cooperation. And what concerns me is like Oxnard's only concerned about the north side of Oxnard, and yet to drive into Hueneme, you come through their urban blight,
I understand.
and then you realize, okay, now we're in Hueneme.
Well, that's why we tried to put it together. It just didn't happen. The demographics from Pleasant Valley Road north to, I'll say that Sunkissed Street, really are very comparable. Their demographics are comparable. One of the things that came after this was the, what do they call it? The gang intervention
Task force. Yeah.
And that really, made a difference because, again, we had demographics that were very similar and concerned about the gang activities that were occurring on both sides of the border. And that's been pretty effective. It's not as much as what I think we had envisioned with a broader redevelopment effort. But that occurred about 7-8 years later. Okay, so one of the things that, I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but one of the things we were trying to do with the RV resort is to create a financial resource to protect Ormond Beach. We were prepared, working with Southern California Edison and the city of Oxnard, had a memorandum of understanding that a certain percentage of the revenues that would come from the RV resort would be pledged to having monitors along Ormond Beach. That there would be fencing that would be provided, maintenance of the channel and the breaching of the sandbar when necessary without affecting the creatures that live at the beach. Again, it was simply an idea that just didn't come together. Now, this is where I really hope it's good. Oh,
Do you think it's possible that someday that might be revisited?
you tell me, Mr. Booth.
Well, the Savior's designed for this.
Well, what I will say
It seems
is,
logical.
I got a lot of education, I had to research, and I didn't do a squat about RVs, and I found that this thing would have been a gold mine.
Yep.
Okay?
Yep.
And it would require a limited amount of capital investment to make it work, okay? And then that, because it failed, then it led to the view tax. Oh, excuse me,
Oh, you don't
the
have
Beach
to-
Assessment District.
Don't talk about that.
Okay, but you asked the question, you tell me, Doug, I mean, that's a political issue. In my mind, it's still relevant today. Because what I found in my research is that when you have an amenity like the ocean right next to you, or a lake, or some other destination draw, you immediately double your revenues. And it could have been, that's history, I'll leave it to you then. All right, so now, this is the part that I love. These are the X-Files, things you don't know about. Some of the smallest skirmishes can result in the biggest outcomes. One of the things to convince the community to move forward was to get past the old. Okay, that's that monument sign to the left. There were a lot of folks that were very enamored with that sign. They were vested in it because it represented their past, and had a difficult time thinking about a new way of branding the city. And this was one of those events that turned the corner to get the community comfortable with the future and let go of the past.
What year was that?
Where was that?
I'm sorry, that's just south of Channel Islands on Ventura Road.
Oh,
Okay, so just as you enter the city going southbound on Ventura Road, after you leave Channel Islands.
That'd be the Navy base on the right?
Yes, that's the Navy base on the right.
I remember that.
Was it Redwood where they have the Italian restaurant right there?
Little Tony?
Well, that's further to the north.
Maybe on the left, yeah.
And then what year was that?
Gosh.
60s.
60s?
Well, the sign to the left, no, that actually was in the early 70s.
Oh,
And
okay.
and then the change to the right occurred, late 70s. And that's where the new monument signs came in, the low profile with the wood ballards. And
That was there when I was,
Yeah, it's not a very good photo.
that was there when I was at Wainimi High School. I remember that.
So, but that was a huge victory. And a lot of people, so we're thinking about these huge issues, and yet that was a huge victory. All right, so these were some of the fun things. The developer we were working with at the time he was very creative. But he had a problem. His lender said, I can't make money available to build a condo complex underneath a water tower. I mean, it just isn't going to work. Nobody's going to want to buy. So what worked out was, and it was his creative idea of, how about if we kind of make it float away? That's why I say putting political hot air to work. Is paint the water tower like a hot air balloon. And then underneath, to the left there you see, that used to be the city's maintenance yard. And now it's totally re-landscaped so that it's not as offensive. Anyway, the long and short of it, it worked. Okay, so remember the slide to the left? I showed that at the beginning. That was my blighted condition. Well, guess what? I used it. We had some tough negotiations on a couple of projects, and one is the renovation of all the area north of Pleasant Valley Road, which is now condos, townhomes. But it was a god-awful mess.
Well, you were skinny back then.
What's that?
You were skinny, look at you.
Yeah, I had hair too. So I did, this was on Halloween. So Halloween, I had a set of negotiations with the developer, and he wasn't happy because we were going to try to force him to do some improvements along the alley, blah, 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 blah. So he comes into the conference room, and I'm just kind of biding my time in my office. And then I walked to the conference room, and he was ready to just go after me. And then it was like, totally disarmed him, and we got it done that afternoon. So, you got to sometimes do things that are a little bit unorthodox. Back to the future. Okay, and you know what, this is going to come up in the near future about this railroad use, but take a look at what it looked like back in the early 70s compared to what it is today. And it brought Biff and the Back to the Future folks. But what some people don't recall is that the quid pro quo of allowing them to film at this location, which is Ventura Road, just north of, well, in between Hueneme Road and Surfside Drive. That's where this location is. The quid pro quo for you to film here, and the city having to put in traffic control and that kind of stuff, is that there used to be a decrepit bridge across the railroad track at Anacapa View Homes. And so they needed that as part of their filming, and we said, fine, but then you take it down when we're done. Because it's a nuisance to us. It was a graffiti haven and all that kind of stuff. And so that's part of the story you didn't see here, is that the filming didn't just happen because we wanted them to be here. No, we wanted something out of it. So. Oh, I wish Orvine was here, because this is not my story. This was Orvine's story. You think you've had a bad day? Well, there was a time where one of our contractors knocked down the wrong building. Okay. The good news is that nobody was in the building at the time, and the city was in the process of acquiring it. So, fortunately, we saved the day. That was Orvine's story. I wasn't part of that one. Now, this is reality. What you see is not always what you get. Even when you do your homework and you do due diligence investigations, what they call phase 1. Site assessments to make sure that you're not going to buy into a toxic condition, you still never know until you start bringing the bulldozers in and they start uncovering stuff. And this has happened more than once.
What is that?
It ended up being a tank full of drilling muds. And drilling muds are considered to be hazardous, but they're not, they're on the hazardous list, so the cleanup ended up not being too bad.
Where was this?
This was on Pleasant Valley, west of Ventura Road. But the story that, and this is not Port Hueneme, but after I left Port Hueneme, I was involved in the redevelopment in Ventura. And at the time that I got there, we were starting the process of acquiring properties for the theater complex downtown and a new parking structure adjacent to it. Okay? And this is the worst thing as a director you ever want to hear. My phone rings, and the guy that's down in the field says, Tom, you need to come down here. That's not good. That's, you know right away, this is not good. So here we go down to where the parking structure ended up being, but there's a big hole in the ground, 20 feet or so. And down at the bottom of this big hole is this black, gooey stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm thinking, oh, they're going to put me in prison. This is, what are we going to do with this? Fortunately, so we had to shut the job site down. The testers came out, and they found that this was ink from the old Starfree press. Really? They left ink behind. Oh, God. Talk about dodging the bullet.
They pumped it into the ground?
No, they left it. The presses were there in their basement, and apparently when they took the stuff out, there was ink leaked.
It was leaked into it.
But I was thinking a whole lot worse.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, okay, you asked about this little tidbit of land that was kind of extending. This is on Pleasant Valley Road. These duplexes were relocated from the Navy base. And remember, I go way back to the beginning, and I say, part of our legacy is that housing went up overnight for the Navy. Well, these were a bunch of new duplexes just marching down the street, and we acquired all of those. And then decided, let's don't just knock these things down. Let's see if there's any value. So we had an auction. And we sold, a third of them. And the next thing I know, about a month later, I get a phone call from my counterpart in the city of Santa Paula that says, you ever do that again? Because they acquired these duplexes and moved them to Santa Paula. So I said, one person's trash is another person's treasure as long as it's not important. Okay, somebody asked about, we did. There were times when this was a great win-win. It saves us money because you burn the thing down, so there's a heck of a lot less disposal, right? But then came lead-based paint, asbestos abatement, radon gas, and I mean, it just,
Can't do it.
it's just, yeah. It's really unfortunate, but that's. And then, I painted a picture that everything's hunky-dory and, you know, we managed to.
At your side?
Do anybody remember these things? Do you remember that sign, feet Tom, fig to the gobies? That was the RV resort. That was on my wedding day. And actually, 2 nights or 3 nights earlier, we had a public hearing. It was very contentious, and somebody left behind some of the protest signs. Somebody picked one up and brought it to my wedding. And I said, oh, I gotta have a photographer take it. So, it's not always easy, but I have to say, this city's done more than I could ever imagine being done anywhere else. So, you know, it's not always easy. And then I love getting back to this one. And this truly was the motto when I first got here. Hueneme, where the sewer meets the sea. That's because of our treatment plant, dumping sewage in our ocean versus where we are today. So, rain is everything. I'm going to conclude, Larry. I want to give you kudos for breathing new life into our facility here.
Espen done a great job.
He's done a great job, and his staff, and his volunteers.
Oh, I asked Shelley what kind you might want to drink.
That's scotch.
Yeah, and these are to please the other half.
No, to please my other half. She did a baseball game.
I know that.
Well, thank you so much.
And thank you, Tom.
Oh, my pleasure. And by the way, I have a video, and I know it's good, but I have a DVD that does a much better job of giving you befores and afters everywhere throughout the town. And it's got audio, and it's kind of fun. And I don't know how you arrange these things if people want to come in and look at it.
There's a viewing place.
Yeah, we got
Tom Free, I'm shocked that Shelley, you got yours.
I'm shocked
He
at
hasn't been
Shelley,
one of
too.
his witticisms with you.
I'd like to,
I gotta respect the councilman.
Oh, yeah, you never did that
to look on the Fort Hueneme Historical Museum Facebook
And we have a website too.
and to keep up to date with all the speakers we're going to have, because we have one that will either be in May or June, where Congresswoman Bromley is just going to say, come, she's going to talk to everybody, and she's going to do it from here. So their office talked to me several times a couple days ago, and it's just a case of her seeing what days on her schedule. And it'll be one of those last.
I understand that the Harbor would also make a presentation on their.
Right, Harbor's going to do the talk on June 3rd, I think, and 11th, and it'll be in 2 parts,
June 4th and 11th.
June 4th and 11th. And it'll be Wilbur, who's going to talk on 1874 to the 1960s. And then part 2, which would be the following Saturday, would be from the 1960 to the present time, and he'll probably talk about the railroad and the cargoes and the bananas and everything else. So that'll be in June. And then we have another speaker after that that's going to talk on